There are a lot of schools of thought regarding footwork. There are about 2 million different videos talking about how to move your feet in a gunfight. The general consensus that I'm getting from a lot of modern instructors are just stand up and shoot. Take a natural body posture, take a deep breath, drop your shoulders, line up to the shot, squeeze, boom. The problem comes from when this is taught within the context of a shoot house, or even worse, an open field. That's really not where gunfights go down. We know from years and years of study that gunfights typically happen up close, in the dark, in an unfamiliar place. And when you add obstructions to that mix, walking normally just doesn't cut it. For instance, usually you'll see this kind of shit on the range. Now that stuff works, don't get me wrong. What I'm saying is, what a real gunfight will look like is more like this.
Please, Pirate, show me your hands! 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 He's in that door! Hands! Go! Hands! Go! Go! Ah, fucker! Hands up!
What we need is a fighting style with footwork that allows us to move with good balance, feel out for obstructions, work well in the dark, work well in tight places, and encourage good gunfighting behavior. We'll get into that. Let's start with what this method looks like. So to begin the stance, what I want you to do is picture a string on the top of your head, and it's pulling the crown of your head straight up, and that aligns your spine and your hips and puts your center of gravity underneath your head. Starting with the empty hand, we see that this is actually martial arts footwork, similar to what you would see in many fighting styles, including with bladed weapons. You'll notice that your rear foot heel goes up. The leading foot feels the ground ahead, and the pushing foot is shoving that foot forward in a shuffling fashion. This makes the front foot a solid platform to place your weight on if you're shoved or begin to fall off balance. The outside edges and balls of the feet bear most of the weight, and the toes curl up just slightly. I know this seems very unnatural, but once you do it a few times, you'll get used to it, and there's a very good reason for it. As you'll see as I go through them, this stance works great with weaponry. As you move, your calves and your core is engaged. That's really important, especially when you start using this technique for peeking around corners and using cover. It will become easier, but to be honest with you, this isn't a perfectly natural, lazy way to walk around. You're going to feel some fatigue after practicing this for a considerable amount of time. You're just going to have to get used to it. Gunfighting's hard. An important note here is that the footwork is completely ambidextrous, so you can put your leading foot as your right or left foot, and it shouldn't be a problem. I find that I can compensate with whichever way my hips are turning by rotating my torso. It's that old Travis Haley, tank treads on the bottom, tank turret on top theory. Your hips are the stable platform that conform to the environment. This method actually encourages that type of behavior. You'll see here that when I'm pieing the corner, my footwork doesn't change at all. This is a very consistent system. You'll see that as we move on. For instance, crouching. So a lot of methods of movement never really address the fact that when you're in a gunfight, you're gonna get your fucking head down. There's no way around it. People's fear response is to duck and get down. You've seen it in countless movies, and there's good reason for it. Happens in real life all the time. No lie, in training I see people all the time standing a little bit too tall, and it's not just in gunfighting training, it's in all sorts of training, including firefighting. They're too lazy to engage their core and engage their legs and put their hips near the ground. But trust me, when you're getting shot at, you'll do it. So that's where the traditional methods of movement kind of fall apart. The just stand there or walk naturally doesn't work when you're trying to crouch behind a piece of cover that's 36 inches tall. Apologies to our friends across the pond. I understand that we are the only backwards, I think, country that uses the standard system instead of the metric, but let's face it, the distance to the moon is measured in feet. Anyway, not only is this the best method for when you're crouching, it's also kind of the only method if you intend on turning around 180 or maneuvering around objects. This becomes very apparent when you try to do a traditional turn while squatting. I know this sounds like you would need to do this, but when you're trying to maneuver around cover like a car or a low-lying barricade or something of that nature, it'll become pretty apparent pretty quick that you're gonna have to learn how to squat and walk at the same time. And speaking of turns, this method lends itself very well to 180-degree target transitions. Now, I did a video on those before, and I described a method called the conservation of angular momentum method. I have no idea if I'm ever going to come up with a decent name for it, but it's being used all over the place, and I don't think it really needs a name. If you haven't checked out that video, please do. And this method isn't just useful for firearms, it's also really useful for edged weapons and blunt force weapons as well. When it comes to turning, I have seen a lot of very, very good instructors teach something that makes a lot of sense, and that's stepping into the turn. What you don't want to do is step out of a turn. That means putting your foot where you can't see just to make a turn. You always want to put your foot where your vision knows there's not an obstruction. Now, I know this method is taught all over the place, and it's great advice. But when you don't have to do it, this method works pretty well. The idea is that you want to move your feet as little as humanly possible. Stepping backwards or to the side increases the risk of stepping on a teammate or a dog or bumping into a family member you're trying to escort from a house. This method, however, encourages as little foot movement as possible. Rather than stepping into the turn instinctively, what we do is pivot on the balls of our feet. So you pivot and transition your rear foot to become your front foot. Your previous leading foot is now the rear pushing foot. All you have to do is pick your heel up a little bit in your new rear foot and turn. Bring the weight of the rifle, weapon, or hands to your chest, spin, and now you're facing the other direction. And like I said, because this method is inherently ambidextrous, or you should be training that way, it doesn't really matter that your footing has now mirror imaged itself. Like I said before, this works really well in places we know gunfights happen, especially in places where it's dark, with unfamiliar footing, and very, very close and tight spaces. All three of those factors commonly occur at the same time, and they can drastically change the outcome of a fight. This footwork prepares you for all three of them. For instance, even blindfolded this works, but in the dark, shuffling your feet along the floor without picking them up too far and doing that little move where you curl your toes slightly up, that motion allows you to feel out obstructions that might be laying out on the floor in front of you. If there's a person, a body, a dog, a bear trap, what have you, you'll be able to touch it lightly first before you step full into it. Now, when people see this method, they often say, wow, that's really, really slow. I get why. Everybody's been programmed, especially in the last few years, to watch a lot of very short videos of people doing burst sprints followed by a bunch of target transitions as fast as humanly possible. It's great, it looks good, it's probably good training, but it also doesn't prepare us for what reality will probably hold. I'm going to give you a piece of advice that somebody gave me a very long time ago, and that piece of advice has stuck with me for years. It's always proven true. Are you ready? Do not fucking run. There is almost no need to run in any emergency situation. And I have a lot of people on the other end of this camera that are probably going, what? But it's true. I know because I've been in a lot of emergency situations. I have been in multiple burning structures and had to put them out. I have been in situations where people are dying and I'm slipping on their blood. I have been in multiple industrial-sized whoopsie daisies and seen a lot of people hurt. And in all of my time doing that, I have never, ever had to sprint. The only time I've ever actually had to run was when I was sprinting away from a fight. And that was in a third world country and I didn't have anything to defend myself. If you're sprinting away from an engagement, I understand why you would need to run. Otherwise, running really just complicates the situation, and I've seen a ton of people get hurt just because they're moving too quickly or not paying attention to their footing. Come to think of it, I've actually helped people with those type of injuries way more than I've ever helped anybody from fighting or from an actual injury taken on by the situation that was happening. It's almost always self-inflicted stupidity. And let me tell you something, somebody that gets injured during a fight or during an emergency situation has now become a liability. It's another thing that everyone has to pay attention to, and it's another set of hands out of the fight and or emergency. This isn't Call of Duty. We do not need to sprint from target to target as fast as we possibly can. So this footwork encourages you to slow down, take a deep breath, and literally take the fight one step at a time. You're really only going to be moving from cover to cover quickly. Everything else is just positioning yourself to get an advantage on the person that's shooting at you. Usually that does not require running, especially if you're in a house. This method does allow you to move quickly. All you have to do is lower yourself further. By lowering your hips, you're able to get much longer strides. The same person that told me don't run is the same person that taught me how to take very long strides and walk quickly. It has served me very, very well. You can use this as kind of a sliding scale and perform a semi-walk forward if you need to take a longer step. The important part is just never let your rear foot pass your front foot while doing this. And furthermore, if you really do need to make a brisk walk, you can abandon this method. That's okay. Ditch it if it's not working, or especially if you're tired. Like I mentioned, this method does require some athletic effort on your part. So if you're being overwhelmed or your legs are on fire and you need to take a break, it's okay. Get into a sitting position, or if you're in adequate cover, take a breather behind that cover and get into a normal standing position. When you're fighting again, get back down and do what you're supposed to do. I know it's not sexy, I know it's not Lucas Botkin fast, but it is absolutely functional in a wide variety of scenarios, and I think it's really worth your consideration for something that you would practice on a regular basis. I'd love to say that I would totally fly out and meet Lucas and he could teach me a thing or two about how to shoot faster, but I'm in a fucking garage, so... Thanks, COVID! If you dig the content, please check out our other videos on our channel and like and subscribe if you think it's worth your time. Thank you very much, and I never know how to finish these things. Namaste, or something.